have it. We now come to the motion on coroners. I call Minister Bacon to move.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that the House has considered the draft coroner's suspension of requirement for jury at inquest coronavirus regulations 2024. Before I move into the purpose of the statutory instrument, Mr. Speaker, I would like to add my congratulations to the new honourable member for Blackpool South on his maiden speech today. I think his efforts to try to avoid being the subject of a pub quiz honourable though they are, of course, Mr. Speaker, I think they may be slightly forlorn, because I can't recall too many occasions where an honourable member made their maiden speech on the same day that Parliament rose for the next election. So I suspect, Mr. Speaker, he may still be the subject of pub quizzes into the future. Now, Mr. Speaker, this instrument is an important part of the Government's ongoing support for coroner services in their continuing recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. It extends for a further 2 years the disapplication of the statutory requirement for any inquest into a death involving COVID-19 to be held with a jury. This will have very practical benefits for the coroner service. Although the real-time impacts of COVID-19 have diminished, they are inevitably delayed in the coronial context, as inquest backlogs, some of which were built up during the pandemic in order to manage wider pressures, continue to be worked through. Natural COVID-19 deaths would not normally be reported to the coroner. However, where the cause of death is unknown or suspicious or has occurred in state detention, COVID-19 may be suspected as a contributing factor. And save for the provision that we are seeking to extend, Section 7 of the Coroners and Justice Act 2009 would require any inquest into such deaths to be held with a jury, because COVID-19 is a notifiable disease.
The Minister may be aware that I had 2 tragic cases in my constituency involving an inquest. And doesn't he think it's about time we modernised and gave more resources to the whole system? Because waiting for 5-6 years, if you've lost a loved one, and never getting resolution, that's not good. Isn't it about time that we looked at the process, looked at the training, and did something a little bit faster for people?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, and I will take the opportunity to say farewell to him, because I think he will be a loss to the House. I think he's put his finger on a good point, and I think that this is something, part of the reason why we are doing what we are proposing in this statutory instrument today is to combat some of what he is talking about. But of course, there is a wider possibility for review as time moves on, and what we do want to see is that coronial inquests are carried through and expedited as quickly as is possible to do. Now, Mr. Speaker, as part of COVID-19 easements, the Coronavirus Act 2020 removed this requirement, and the resulting resource pressures on coroner services throughout the pandemic. To support continued pandemic recovery in the coroner's courts, Parliament sanctioned the replacement of the 2020 emergency measure with a provision in the Judicial Review and Courts Act 2022, which amends the 2009 Act so that for the purposes of jury requirement in inquests relating to notifiable disease, COVID-19 does not count as a notifiable disease. This does not prevent the coroner from calling a jury in COVID-19 related inquest. They retain the discretion to do so in these, as in any other inquest. The 2022 Act provision includes safeguards to ensure that COVID-19 inquests are not treated differently on a permanent basis. Any extension is limited to 2 years, is subject to parliamentary approval, and must be justified by an assessment of the impact on coroner services were the provision to expire. To evidence the need for extension of this provision, the Ministry of Justice asked all coroners in England and Wales to estimate their usage of the disapplication provision since June 2022 and to assess the impact on their case management if it is not extended. Now, the response rate was only around 11%, but even amongst that small number of coroners, it was estimated that this provision has removed the requirement for a jury in around 530 inquests over the past 2 years. So without it, even that small sample would have increased the annual number of jury inquests across England and Wales, typically around 470, by about 50%. And about half of respondents predicted that a significant impact for their case management if this provision is allowed to expire. This is because, as the Liverpool and Wirral senior coroner put it, and I quote, "For each day of listing for an inquest without a jury, it takes a week's listing with a jury." This wider context is important, Mr. Speaker. Parliament is concerned about the impact of inquest backlogs on the bereaved, as the Honourable Gentleman has just highlighted. The extension of this measure for a further 2 years will support coroners in their continuing efforts to reduce these backlogs, thereby promoting the government's objective of putting the bereaved at the heart of the coronial process. This should mean that, subject to any assessment closer to the time, I do not expect any future Justice Minister to need to seek Parliament's agreement to a further extension from June 2026. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I beg to move.
The question is, as on the order paper, Shadow Minister Kevin Brennan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And can I also put on record my thanks to you and the Deputy Speakers for looking after our interests during this Parliament. And can I also take the opportunity to congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Blackpool South, on his brilliant maiden speech. We learnt that his wife is called Portia during the course of his maiden speech, which is quite appropriate, I think, since we're discussing a justice bill now, given that Portia gave one of the most famous speeches on justice in The Merchant of Venice, when she said, "The quality of mercy is not strained, it droppeth, as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesses him that gives and him that takes." So I'm glad he aptly reminded us of his wife's name during the course of his speech, and I congratulate him, and I'm sure we'll be seeing each other again soon, without being complacent in any way, Mr. Speaker, about the electorate. We won't be dividing the House on this measure this morning. I think overall, given the state of the backlog impacting the coronial system, this is a sensible measure and one to which the opposition won't contest today. However, I think it's worth discussing very briefly the reasons for this backlog and the government's complete inability to get a grip on any aspect of our justice system. After 14 years of Conservative rule, we have significant and in some cases record high backlogs across the whole of the courts and tribunal system, and that means that victims and the families are waiting years for answers and waiting years for justice. It really has become the Department of Justice delayed, and we all know what that means. So Labour will work at a pace to tackle the backlogs, grinding our justice system to a halt and restore public confidence in that justice system. But on this particular measure, Mr. Speaker, we won't be seeking to divide the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hope to catch your eye later in the debate and thank you and others then. So can I just confine myself to this measure and congratulate the honourable member for Blackpool South. Can I just say this is a sensible measure. I'm delighted to see my honourable friend and next-door constituency neighbour, at least for a couple more days, in his place on the Treasury bench. He will know that the Justice Committee published a very substantial report in relation to coroners some time back. We did a follow-up very recently. This is wise, this is sensible, but there are broader issues that need to be tackled with the coronial system. And I do hope either my honourable friend and my side, if we come back into government, or any other future government, will look again at our report. Because the one thing that we had not done, and we need to do, is actually tackle the root problem with the coroner system, which is that it is piecemeal, it sits outside the rest of the normal judicial framework, and I hope the future government will revisit our recommendation that we should move to a national coroner's service. That would ensure greater consistency. It would ensure that the same service is provided to bereaved families right across the country, which is not the case. It will be a small investment, but one that would do the right thing. There is a role, of course, for juries, particularly those important matters. I welcome the changes that the government has made in terms of representation of families at inquests. But again, I hope we can go further, particularly when state agencies and public bodies are concerned. But this is a sensible measure in the right direction. But I hope we will grasp the nettle and have a proper national coroner's service, something that has been recommended overwhelmingly in the evidence to our committee and championed by both the chief coroners that I've had the pleasure of working with, His Honour Judge Lucraft, firstly, and recently retired His Honour Judge Thomas Teague, who both have done a fantastic job as chief coroners, and I wanted to pay tribute to both of them.
Edward Timpson. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And can I begin just by echoing much of the comments made by my honourable and learned friend, the still chair of the Justice Select Committee, the member for Bromley and Chislehurst. And in doing so, can I pay my respects to him and his leadership of that committee over the best part of a decade. We see so much change and churn in this place. To have his knowledge, his experience, his humanity, his enthusiasm and his ability to actually get things done, to make the Justice Select Committee, which I've been privileged to be a member of for the last 18 months, to bring change, positive change, in many aspects of the justice world. And I have no doubt in whatever he does next in his own professional career, he will continue to make really great waves for those who are touched in some way by the justice system. And part of that work has included, as my honourable and learned friend has said, is the coronial system. And for the second time, I think the first was 2011, and more recently this and last year, looking at all aspects of the coronial system, not least the impact that COVID has had on the ability for it to function in the way that we all would want it to. And the Minister is right with the approach he's taken today, the pragmatic approach, to provide some breathing space, some capacity within the coronial system, so that many of those cases that need to be moved through that court in a timely and compassionate way are able to do so. There are, of course, as has been alluded to, many other issues that need to be addressed. And I very much hope that, unfortunately, due to the sudden end to this Parliament, that the great work that we were doing and the report that we were on the very cusp of producing for the government to respond to will still be in the form, I think, of correspondence that has gone to ministers in the department, be looked at carefully in the next 6 weeks by ministers who will still be in their place, as well as officials who, whatever hue the next government happens to be, can put it straight onto the table of the next minister, hopefully still my honourable friend sitting on the front bench, so that we don't lose any of the momentum that hopefully the report will be able to achieve. I give way.
And Select Committee colleague, allow me very briefly to say, can I also agree with him what he's just said about the chairman of the Select Committee, who's also in this place. Of course, he's a good, everyone knows he's a good friend of mine. We co-chair the Miscarriages of Justice group together. He has been a brilliant champion for miscarriages, and I hope you will agree with him that we have here someone who we're going to miss dreadfully in the House of Commons, and indeed what will the House of Commons do with Bob and I both standing down?
Well, the honourable gentleman, the honourable friend, for the purposes of today, was my very first Select Committee chair back in 2008 when I joined the Children's Schools and Families Select Committee, and a sort of baptism of fire, as it turned out. So I've been fortunate to have a number of excellent chairs to be part of their committee over the years, and I also wish him well in what comes next in his varied but very colourful life that I'm sure he has ahead of him. But there is some of the detail that sits behind this statutory instrument that really does need to have the continued attention of ministers and the Minister of Justice. My honourable and learned friend touched on the need to look at the potential unification of the service, the funding model, how it's resourced. We don't want to imperil the rule of law by making the service unworkable. The need potentially for an inspectorate, so we know actually how well it's functioning. And as the Minister quite rightly said, making sure that we put bereaved families at the very heart of that process. So I do hope that this measure that has been taken today will be part of enabling many of those changes to take hold in the ensuing years. Now, Mr. Speaker, you'll know that this is my second time round, often unfortunately called a retread in Parliament, but unlike Arnold Schwarzenegger, this time I won't be back. This is my last time that I will be standing up in this place. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank you, Mr. Speaker, all your team, for their support and friendship over 14 out of the last 16 years, and also my staff up in Cheshire, in Eddisbury and Coroners, which is my previous seat, Ros, Dan, Lynn, Joel, Amy and quite a few others who came before then. including Sean, who has just recently got on the candidates list, and I suspect has a reasonable chance of finding a seat, as we still have about 100 or so seats to find one. So if he does, I wish him and his campaign extremely well, as I do for my own candidate successor, Afra Brandreth, who will be standing in the new seat of Chester South and Eddisbury, who is a first-class candidate, and I very much hope that she'll be able to join colleagues here after the general election. I give way.
Right, honourable and learned friend, for giving way, because with characteristic modesty, if I may say, he hasn't mentioned his own very significant contribution, both on the Justice Committee, as a minister, and the contribution that he has made and his family have made to the justice system, because everybody knows the work that he has done personally, his brother and his father, to deal compassionately and humanely with those who go through the prison. They are absolute role models, and he's an absolute role model. I'm deeply grateful to him for his friendship and support. We wish him all the very best for the future.
Well, I'm extremely grateful to my honourable and learned friend. I probably now have to declare my interests that are on the register, not least my brother's chairmanship of the Prison Reform Trust, but they're all for all to see. And it is true that there is clearly a gene in the Timpson family that makes us want to reach out beyond our own family to help others, whether that's through fostering, helping ex-offenders into work. And that's something that, beyond Parliament, I want to continue to do. And just finally then, Mr Speaker, can I, in the same way that the new member for Blackpool South, who I congratulate on a really excellent maiden speech, it took me back to mine in 2008, and it's a nerve-wracking moment, but he delivered it superbly. And I wish him him and his family all the very best. I had a very young child when I first came into Parliament. Actually, I also had another young child when I came into Parliament again. Obviously it's a route to success into this place. So I want to thank my own family, my late mother Alex, my father John, for all their inspiration and guidance that they've given me, my wife Julia, my 4 children Sam, Elizabeth, Lydia and Nell. I hope they're going to see a bit more of me now, and I hope that that's the right thing to do.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many of that opinion say aye?
Aye.
The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes.